General McMaster, thank you so very much for accepting our invitation and having a conversation with Afghanistan International.
Aruf, hey, it's great to be with you, and thanks for the great work that you're doing to keep accessible, the important stories of the people of Afghanistan, and helping us understand what's going on, despite the great challenges there.
Thank you, General. It's been 6 months into President Trump's term, yet there is no articulated Afghanistan strategy. We don't see it. Why is it, General?
Well, Ref, the sad part of it is I think just people want to forget about it. I mean, it was a painful experience, and I think a lot of it was self-inflicted in terms of what I would call a self-defeat in Afghanistan. People don't want to acknowledge it in large measure because the responsibility for it was shared between the first Trump administration and the Biden administration. And so I think a lot of it is just kind of denial, a coping mechanism, maybe, to avoid the pain of thinking about it. And of course, I think we need to do the opposite, because it's very important not only to learn the lessons of the self-defeat, I would call it, in Afghanistan, but also to begin to adopt a policy to the reality that Afghanistan is once again in the hands of a terrorist organization.
Yes, we can see obviously the recent reports from SIGAR and also the UN indicated that there are many terrorist organizations and terrorist groups are active in Afghanistan. How concerned we should be regarding those terrorist organizations in Afghanistan?
Well, Ref, we should be very concerned, obviously, because of the plight of the Afghan people who have been thrust back into hell under Taliban rule. But also because of this terrorist ecosystem that exists along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border in particular, and the degree to which these groups share expertise, they share personnel, they share resources, and they have in mind, this objective of establishing the caliphate, extinguishing really what we would see as fundamental human rights, and to advance kind of a medieval vision, right, of governance, and that would again thrust people kind of into a hell that Afghanistan experienced between and lived previously from 1996 to 2001, and that we've seen others live under. Right, what we should have learned from the mass murder attacks of September 11, 2001, and what we should have learned from the rise of ISIS in Syria and Iraq is that once these groups gain a haven and a support base, they become profoundly dangerous to the entire world. So I think it is an extremely dangerous situation. Lots of U.S. designated terrorist organizations are, in the Khorasan region, which is of ideological importance to these Takfirin and Salafin groups, as is the Euphrates River Valley, and this is why these are the two geographic centers of this fight against jihadist terrorist organizations.
Yeah, if the danger is that high and serious, so why Trump's administration and this White House is ignoring Afghanistan and that threats that may threats the United States national security, perhaps in the short term or in the long term?
Well, Aref, there were these narratives in the United States associated with ending endless wars. That these were endless wars that were costly, and if you think about really what the American people went through in the 2000s, of course, these are nothing compared to the challenges the Afghan people have been through. But there were a series of disappointments and traumas in the 2000s. There were the mass murder attacks of 9/11. Then there were the unanticipated length and difficulty of the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq. A lot of people thought these would be fast wars, right? And of course, it seemed that way because it was so easy, to defeat the Taliban, fielded forces. Not really easy, but it happened quite rapidly, and then also to collapse the Taliban regime. Well, there was a lot more to be done, obviously, to consolidate gains and get to a sustainable political outcome in Afghanistan that was in the U.S. interests in terms of denying a safe haven support base for terrorists, and in the Afghan people's interest. And of course, we know how Al-Qaeda helped the Taliban regenerate, along with Pakistan's ISI in the 2002, 3, 4, 5 period of time, began to escalate their attacks in Afghanistan. We weren't prepared for that, right? So psychologically, even in terms of of that war going on simultaneous with the war in Iraq. Then financial crisis, 2008, 2009. Throw in an opioid epidemic, the big transitions in the global economy that occurred after China stole jobs from the United States with its statist mercantilist policies, right? And so Americans were thinking, hey, we have problems here in the United States. Why are we trying to solve other people's problems abroad? And then we lost track of the reality that after certainly 2017, with the new strategy in place, we weren't doing the fighting. I mean, Afghans were doing the fighting and bearing the brunt of the battle on a modern day frontier between barbarism and civilization. But that narrative of endless wars continued. And I think you still have that kind of today, is that, hey, we have our own problems here. What are we doing abroad? And of course, the counter argument, Aref, is what I wish I would hear more of, is that what we learned from 9/11, what we learned from the pandemic, from COVID-19, is the challenges to our security that develop abroad can only be dealt with at an exorbitant cost once it reaches our shores. And so it's important to remain engaged with like-minded partners, to fight this fight on behalf of our own interests, but on behalf of humanity.
General McMaster, do you see any indication that this White House may consider a plan and a strategy towards Afghanistan and South Asia? Obviously, you worked with Mr. Trump. You were the chief architect of his South Asia strategy. You worked with Afghans, with Pakistanis. You know the region very well. Do you see any indications that Mr. Trump may consider any sort of strategy soon about Afghanistan, about this problem that you explained?
Yeah, I do, right? Because I think what President Trump has demonstrated, and this is a problematic agreement, on the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, but also most recently on the Armenia-Azerbaijan agreement, that he likes to get involved. He wants to try to, just kind of bring some kind of peace and that sort of thing. And I think what he will recognize is, even though the relationship with India is in a strained position at the moment, that the future of the United States and the future of India are aligned with one another, mainly because of the threat that India has from China, as well as its other nuclear armed neighbor, Pakistan, and the long and contentious relationship with Pakistan. I'm not as worried as some people are about this kind of rapprochement with Pakistan, as long as President Trump's eyes are open, and realizes, how Pakistani leaders, especially in the army, are some of the best liars in the world, and who will continue to string you along and deceive you as long as you're willing to be gullible about it, right? And so I think that he'll come to that realization. He came to it early in his first term. Remember when we cut off all economic and military assistance to Pakistan, and he had that tough message to Pakistan. And then, of course, he kind of reversed that. And I was already out of my job as national security advisor when I saw Imran Khan sitting in the Oval Office, and I was yelling at the television, Aref, like, what the hell is that guy doing, in the Oval Office? So I think, I think it's okay, because maybe what can happen, I don't know, is that Pakistan will come to the realization that it is now in a servile relationship with China. Pakistan has surrendered its sovereignty to China and is a client state of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. Look at the Chinese-Pakistan economic corridor. Look at some of the energy dependencies. Look at all the trade dependencies. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs for Pakistan. So if they come to the realization that their future lies not as a colony of China, but maybe they do value their independence and their sovereignty, that they will understand that their future lies more with the United States, and maybe understand that their future lies with, instead of seeing an Indian behind every tree, and having this permanent hostility toward India, that regional economic integration in South Asia is the answer for everybody. So will that happen? Maybe some point at the future. I think the Trump administration might be working toward that. You have some really good people in the administration, in the State Department, for example, who understand the situation. They have no illusions about Pakistan, and maybe over time there'll be an ability to support Afghans who are advocating for a change in the nature of the government in Afghanistan as well.
Yeah, fascinating. So, considering the latest meeting between General Assem and President Trump at the White House, and there are indications that the relationship between Islamabad and Washington is getting much better than perhaps 6 months ago or a year ago. My question is, General McMaster, is the United States again drifting into Pakistan's orbit on Afghanistan?
I hope not. I mean, I hope not. You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, in the book At War with Ourselves and in Battlegrounds, I call it serial gullibility, right? And we have to learn from, from the patterns of the past. Going back to Musharraf, and the pledge of cooperation in counterterrorism. That's what they always hold out, right? We can work together, but then of course the next thing they do is they complain that they've been the victim. They argue that they would be more active against these jihadist terrorist organizations if only they had more resources. And then they're asking you to whip out your wallet, and give them some more resources, and then they use that money in part to continue to fund these jihadist terrorists, or at least to do it by funneling Gulf donors money into these jihadist terrorist organizations. So, hey, I just think it's time to stop the serial gullibility. What I told then Chief of the Army, General Bajwa, when I was National Security Advisor, I said, hey, President Trump's a business guy, right? He wants to see results. He doesn't want to hear words. And I think that's true about President Trump. And so what I'm hoping for is that, if there really has been a change of heart in the Pakistani Army leadership, I don't believe it, Arif, but if there has been, we should be able to see evidence of that in their deeds and in their actions. And that's what we should look for.
So you worked with President Trump, and also you know him very well. Is there anything, General McMaster, about Afghanistan that strikes him the most, or caught his attention? I think I read in Bob Woodward's book that somewhere Mr. Trump mentioned that Afghanistan got a lot of minerals, something like that. Do you think there is anything at all in Afghanistan that now President Trump may consider that seriously about Afghanistan?
I think there is, especially if you see how it's connected to what China's doing, right? China's trying to get a grip on supply chains that are critical to defense industries, to the global economy, so they can use that control for coercive purposes. And China has designs in Afghanistan. They haven't gone well for them. Obviously, they've been disappointed, I think, in terms of their ability to extract from Afghanistan. Of course, China is an extractive model, right? Look at how they're destroying ecologies and the environment in Africa, right, to extract goods from there. And they're the new vanguard of the Chinese Communist Party, is a Chinese bank official with duffel bags full of cash to pay people off, to indebt future generations, to fund projects that are done by Chinese companies with Chinese workers whose salaries go back to China and leave your country destitute. It's kind of a new form of colonialism, So I think that creates an opportunity for the United States and other, free market economies to compete with China, to say, hey, to countries, ultimately, if Afghanistan can, at least in portions of the country, throw off the yoke of the Taliban, that there could be opportunities for economic development that can strengthen at least portions of Afghanistan, not to fragment the country again. But I mean, obviously, none of this can happen under Taliban rule, right?
Yes,
I mean, it would
absolutely
have to happen as Afghanistan evolves toward a post-Taliban regime of some kind.
Yeah, President Trump talks a lot about Bagram Air Base. He keep talking about that for months. Why he talks a lot about Bagram Base? Is that an indication that Donald Trump sees Afghanistan in the context of competing China in the region?
Well, I think so, right? And that's part of it. But also he sees it as connected to the folly and the incompetence of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021, and giving up Bagram, and then compelling compelling us to hold on to a portion of Kabul airport under conditions that were profoundly dangerous and that became deadly. So for hundreds of Afghans and for Americans as well. So I think Bagram, he has that kind of that it evokes the image of the deadly and humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021.
Yeah, President Trump also talked a lot about getting back the equipments that United States left in Afghanistan. He talked that we want them back, but General McMaster, is that technically and diplomatically feasible to get those equipments back to the United States?
No, it's not feasible.
Why so?
Well, it's impossible, right? Unless you want to reinvade Afghanistan, which we could do, by the way, if we had the will, but we don't have the will to do it. I mean, we could take it back. The Taliban, as you know, is not that strong. I think the reason the Taliban was able to succeed so rapidly was because of the psychological blows that were delivered to the Afghan people, the Afghan government, and especially the Afghan security forces after we began to engage in negotiations with the Taliban without the Afghan government present in 2019. I think that was the big mistake. And then, of course, the suspension of all sorts of different kinds of assistance, from air support to intelligence to logistics support. And of course, what that did is it gave the Taliban the opportunity to say, okay, hey, to corps commanders, to provincial, government officials, here's your alternatives, right? You either accommodate with us or we kill you and your family, right? I think that's the way I see the collapse.
You know what's going on in Afghanistan. The situation is quite dire and horrible for women, for people of Afghanistan entirely, especially for women. Do you, General McMaster, do you see any possibility that the United States of America somehow get involved and help Afghan women, Afghan people to get over of this situation?
Well, Aref, here's what I think we can do. These authoritarian regimes, oftentimes they're not that strong. They just have to be stronger than, as you mentioned, than any organized opposition. And they really need 5 things to stay in power, right? They need cash flow. They need security forces to brutalize and to threaten people. They need stories to tell their people. Hey, we're virtuous. We're the best thing for you, right? Lies and deceptions. To create an external enemy that they're saving you from. The 4th thing they need is they need control over life choices, right? Women can't get educated. You can't have a job unless we say you can have a job, right? And the final thing is they need an international environment that allows them to continue to exist. They need support from people like Russia that has recognized the Taliban. So I think what can be done is that the United States and like-minded countries around the world can work together to isolate the Taliban regime from those 5 sources of strength and to weaken them. And I think that's what we should be doing.
Wow. So would love to know more about this as a historian, as a general, as a strategic thinker. So what would be your point of view regarding fixing this situation and helping Afghans who don't want this situation, don't want a religious dictatorship in Afghanistan? There are many people who are fighting, women, civil society. There are some oppositions group in Afghanistan, in exile. There are some potential to change the situation, but would love to know how would you lay out like a point of view to change the situation?
Well, I would say the first thing you need unity among the opposition groups. And this is really what the Taliban was able to capitalize on, is the disunity of the various groups because of the way that Afghanistan fragmented really since the Sour Revolution, but then really during the Civil War period, the resistance to the Soviet occupation, the Civil War period, and then even in the aftermath of the collapse of the Taliban regime, and how really the reliance on the warlords and militias, the Mujahideen era militias, morphed into criminalized patronage networks that gained control of portions of the economy and portions of the country. And that lack of unity is really what was a real problem. And so I think what the emphasis should be on is a younger generation that gets beyond the Mujahideen era elite period of time, and and um, and then and of course all the figures I'm talking about, and it has to be a multi-ethnic reform movement that takes a vow to be unified together and to work together. I think that's the first step. And if there's that unified movement, it'll be easier for people to support that movement. But as long as that movement remains fragmented, it will never be able to become stronger than the Taliban.
General, you know the Afghan leaders very well. You worked with Ashraf Ghani, the previous president, Hamid Karzai, Dr. Abdullah Atmar. You know these leaders, and you know Afghan people very well and Afghan culture. So one of the things that strikes me, and you mentioned that in your previous book, Battlegrounds, and that is, as long as I understood, that in your point of view, President Karzai and his close aide, Khurram, somehow played in the hands of Pakistanis. Is that true?
Absolutely. I mean, you could see it in their behavior, right? And they were fed a lot of propaganda and disinformation by Pakistan indirectly, as you know. I mean, there are a lot of connections to the Taliban too, with various people because of kinship lines and other connections, right, in Afghanistan. I mean, it's better than I do, Aref. It's for an American, it's kind of a confounding place, but Karzai was the object of a major propaganda and disinformation campaign to convince him that the U.S. and the coalition were the problem, right? And this was the narrative around night raids and everything else, and so this really affected Karzai's psyche. Of course, being the president of Afghanistan, the only president, in the modern period who had a peaceful transition of power, of course, that's already an insecure position to be in. And so he felt also that he couldn't rely on the United States. We kept saying we're leaving. So a lot of pressure on Karzai. And that made him susceptible to this disinformation, conspiracy theories. They really got in his head, Aref, I thought, and this is based on many conversations I had with him over the years.
Your conclusion is that Khurram somehow was an agent of ISI?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I do know what he was feeding, that what he was feeding Karzai was consistent with the ISI's disinformation and propaganda campaign.
So how about Ashraf Ghani? Mike Pompeo pictured him as a fraud, as a weak, as a liar, he said, and also as a person who holds power tightly and was not able to have a flexibility till a few weeks before the collapse. Is that the right assessment of his personality?
No, I don't think so. Ashraf Ghani, of course, he's an academic. He was not kind of a mediator and coalition builder kind of around issues like maybe Karzai was with patronage and so forth. But Ghani was, I think, a profoundly honest person. But I think what afflicted him more than anything else is really an inflexibility in terms of bringing in, mainly the old Shor Nazar leadership into a coalition. His inability to really do that, to affect that, and thereby reinforcing, some of the ethnic divisions that made the government susceptible to collapse. And then also, he was the object of a lot of pressure from the United States, to share power with the Taliban. That was a delusion, I mean, how did that work out, Aref? Of course they're not going to share power. And Ghani knew that. And that's when I believe the United States began actually, in some ways, to partner with the Taliban against Ashraf Ghani. And this is with, Khalilzad and others. So I have a lot more sympathy for Ghani. Of course, no leader's perfect. Every leader's flawed. Was he the perfect leader for Afghanistan at the time? No, but who was, right? Who was, right? I mean, so, do you prefer Hibatullah Akhundzada? That's what I would ask. That's what I ask people. For those who really are down on Ashraf Ghani, I just would say, well, how's Hibatullah Akhundzada working out for you?
So many people say that Khalilzads somehow manipulated the United States in terms of foreign policy toward Afghanistan. Is that a right assessment, or he did whatever the United States wanted to do, or the White House?
Yeah, I think it's a combination, Arif. I mean, I think he had kind of his own agenda there, but also, he was giving President Trump what President Trump wanted, which is out of Afghanistan. And nobody was really convincing Trump, as we did in 2017 to 2018, that the fate of Afghanistan is connected to U.S. vital interests. And that's where you got the South Asia strategy in 2017. And sadly, that was reversed, and people got in Trump's ear. And with this mantra of end the endless wars, the graveyard of empires narrative, which is all BS history, right? It's not accurate history, but those are the people that prevailed with President Trump. And Khalilzad, I think he gave Trump what he wanted, but also, he did have, I think, was sadly kind of a personal axe to grind, with Ashraf Ghani.
Last question, General McMaster. Thank you so much for having this time with us. So you mentioned previously about the changes that we see in the United States, like MAGA movement doesn't really want a sort of foreign policy to take care of problems of others, even helping Ukraine, Israel, and so on and so forth. Considering all these changes that we see, how would you view the future of countries who depend on international aid like Afghanistan, or international organizations like the United Nations that could help and organize a meeting, or lay out a strategy toward Afghanistan and convince international community to help Afghans or Afghan state, something like that? How would you view the future of these countries, particularly Afghanistan?
Well, Arif, let me just say up front, it was a pleasure to be with you. I think what's really important is Americans don't want to underwrite organizations that are operating against their interests. And that's happened too much. I mean, look at the UN Human Rights Council. It's a joke, right? Look at the World Health Organization. It was a joke on COVID, right? It was captured by the Chinese Communist Party, at least its influence. So, UNRWA, for example, is another organization. So, I mean, I think Americans are tired of it. I think that's a positive thing. It doesn't mean we should disengage from all international organizations, but we should prioritize those that advance our interests and maybe minimize, our participation in those that are operating actively against us. So, hey, it was a real pleasure to be with you.
Thanks. You so very much. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you.